Hello and welcome to Star USA Training. Today is Tuesday, February 13th, and we're talking about software and technology in trade compliance. This webinar is being recorded. The slides, the materials, and recording will all be posted on our website about a week after this is finished. Everyone who registered for the webinar will get an email as soon as it goes live on the website. There is an NCBFAA code at the end of the webinar, and this session is eligible for one continuing education credit for NCBFAA. All participants are currently muted, and the Q&A feature is available if you have any questions. I will answer the questions at the end, and hopefully you'll all take away something useful from this session today. And thank you for joining us. So right off the top here, 31% of businesses have fully automated at least one function. And when we talk about software in compliance today, it's important to recognize how prevalent it has become over the last 5, 6, 7, 10 years, and how much more likely it's going to become over time. 2 out of 3 knowledge workers say automation has helped them be more productive at work. So before we dive fully into software, let me give you a little bit of background on who I am and why I'm talking about this stuff. My name is Michael D. Easton. I am the president and general manager of Star USA Inc. We are a trade compliance education and consulting firm out of Northeast Ohio. I've spent 20 years in the field of import and export compliance, supply chain security, export controls, yada, yada. My focus is on operational excellence, verifiable progress, and sustainable compliance. I very much like helping make compliance less complicated for everyday people that have to do the work. So when we talk about software, when we talk about technology, I want to recognize that everyone's jobs are changing. I've gained several perspectives from my 20 years on the job that I want to bring to bear in today's discussion. And I know that you all have unique perspectives as well. So feel free to share those with us in the chat or in the Q&A. And let's have a conversation, get a conversation going about this topic, since it is still relatively new to our industry. I do also want to say that I know that you're out there by yourself in a lot of cases, and you're working in a strategic role where you're performing as a knowledge resource for your business, but you don't often have a sounding board. And I would like to put ourselves out there as an option for you. If you need to have some sort of connection with somebody else in the industry and you want a sounding board, if you want to run things past people, feel free to reach out to us. You can email us at hello@starusa.org. We'd be happy to engage you in a conversation. And the main thing that I want you to take away from today's session is that we need to be smart about trade compliance. It's got to be right in our field every single time. That's why that's why my business exists. That's why clients come to me so stressed out. But I want you to recognize that you don't need to be stressed by these things, but we need to be smart about how we leverage technology. The future is still so much bigger than the past. So from day one in your role, you've used technology at your workplace. Mastering your company's software has been a launchpad of success for you in your trade compliance professional journey. That much has been true since I've been in the business, and it will continue to be true going into the future. Tech today does more than it did yesterday, and we need to recognize how far we've come, even over the last couple of years since 2020, 2021. Tech is likely to do more tomorrow than it does today. And recognizing these realities is going to help us position and align our mentalities around how we approach our jobs, our professions as trade compliance professionals, and our careers here. What we are knowledge workers. And a knowledge worker, a person who does knowledge work, you're providing organizational value through expertise, critical thinking, and interpersonal skills. Now, those are 3 things that software, at least currently, cannot replicate. Software does not build expertise. It can fake it in some cases, but it cannot actually develop expertise, nor can it think critically. It can analyze large swaths of data, but it can't do the thinking for us. And certainly interpersonal skills, if I hear another software apologize to me. Well, so we have to recognize the important role that we play in our careers. Our knowledge work relies on our awareness and familiarity gained by experience of facts and situations. Throughout our careers, we've all been relentless adopters of new tech, weaving them into our daily lives, both personally and professionally. That's not a new concept. It's been around for a long, long time. But we all know that software isn't just a tool, it's a secret for doing our jobs and amplifying our impact and maximizing our potential in every task that we do. Software is one of the things that we use to overcome hurdles that existed yesterday and make them simpler and smaller hurdles than they were before. Successful knowledge workers are going to leverage and adapt to changing environments. That's what we have to do in order to succeed at the regulatory trade compliance environment as it is. We have to recognize new regulations, how they impact our business, and apply those rules in a way that will help our business succeed and then help us succeed at our professions. And that's just part of a modern workforce today, is that we need to be adaptable. Trick here is knowing how to keep up, and I will say that it's not supposed to be easy. If it was easy, it wouldn't be knowledge work. It wouldn't be work at all. So I know that it's hard in order to keep up with the technologies that are out there and recognize what they can and can't do for us. So I want to impress upon everyone here that tech is already part of what we're keeping up with. We do it every day, whether we know it or not. We've been doing it at our job since day one, and we're going to be needing to keep up with it as things move forward. And even with the advent of things like artificial intelligence and the increasing capacities and capabilities of those sorts of technologies, it's still the same core principles of learning and adapting to new technologies. So learn, adapt, incorporate, and advance are key concepts that I want to impart upon everyone here. And when we talk about automation and software and trade compliance, we're talking about the tools that help us accomplish our tasks. And in the trade compliance universe, there are three basic groups that I see when I look at trade compliance softwares out there. The first major group are the ERP systems, the enterprise resource planning systems. These are your SAPs, your Oracles, Microsoft Dynamics, AS400, if you're still on those systems, and there's dozens and dozens more. These have been around for a long time, and these softwares help international businesses manage orders and inventory, sales, shipments, and much more, things like that. The mechanics of orchestrating a business on the everyday. They will often link in multiple sites around the world with shared systems, and that's becoming increasingly more common. And sometimes those systems are shared across borders, which is presenting new challenges for things like sharing technology with restricted parties. And the biggest risks in ERP have to do with data entry issues or unintended use cases of the softwares. But largely, they're going to be the big behemoths that coordinate large business activities. And they're essential to most international businesses. The next category here are GTM softwares. This stands for Global Trade Management. There are many software providers out there: Amber Road, Descartes, Integration Point, SAP and Oracle have their own bolt-ons, and there's many, many more. And they perform some role within the scope of logistics or regulatory compliance or other import-export information management that allows you to incorporate that data into your ERP systems most often, generate documentation relevant to the shipment or the transaction in question. And there are a host of different software providers out there. What I'm not going to do today is recommend any particular software. I'm not licensed to do that, but I want to make you aware that if you're looking for softwares for your organization in the category of ERP, these are some places you can start, or you can research ERP softwares or research GTM softwares, and that will help point you in the right direction. And the other category, the category I see most often in my role, are the other tools that are often purpose-built that either will link up to your ERP systems or otherwise provide information to trade compliance people. But they are often standalone custom pieces of software that don't have any major software provider behind them, or they don't have there's no off-the-shelf solution that you can really pick up and plug in. And that's because trade compliance in general is not a set it and forget it type of industry. That's not the segment of the business that we're in. We're in this unique scenario applies to my unique business on these unique criteria. There are some tools out there that are provided by federal government, free resources that you can take advantage of that I would put into the other category. Here are things like the Schedule B search engine, the BIS consolidated screening list, the automated commercial environment reporting tools that you have access to as an importer or exporter, where you can pull reports from customs on your import activity. And you can develop customized bolt-ons or manipulations for your GTM or your ERP systems as well. And in addition to these, which we won't be going into today, there's a whole host of communication technologies that have taken over in the last few years. Video conferencing and text-based workplace communication platforms, shared document repositories, and lots more, some of which can integrate with your other systems. So there's a lot of technology out there in the world today. But when we're talking about trade compliance, we're really focusing on these areas. And I'm really dialed into the GTM and the other categories that overlap with the trade compliance responsibilities. It's important to recognize when talking about technologies that we're looking at the options that are right in front of us, and we're weighing the costs and the risks that shape our choices. Selecting one software or developing one software over another is often going to put us in a position where we have to understand the ramifications of adopting that software or that methodology. And it's important to understand these factors in order to use them intelligently. You can't just buy an off-the-shelf version of a GTM software and expect it to work for your business. I've never once seen it work that way, where people buy the packaged software, plug it into their ERP, and away they go, and it's off and running. There's always some degree of understanding how the software is going to fit the business's needs versus the other way around. So next up, we're going to be talking about the suitability of software for regulatory objectives. Now that we know kind of what universes we're talking about, I want to focus on which types of software and which tasks performed by software are going to be suitable for our environments. 34% of small businesses say that automating tasks like data entry reduces error. When I saw this stat, I was actually surprised. I would expect it to be higher. There is a high degree of data entry in trade compliance and reliance on data. And I think, to me, this stat reveals that a lot of us take for granted the technology that we use every day. When documents populate with product descriptions and product numbers and ship to addresses and ship from addresses and sold from and sold to, Incoterms, all those things, when they bring in to our documents, that degree of automation didn't used to exist. In my career, I've seen times where these documents were often generated by hand, or at least by typing them directly into a computer each time. So the risk of data entry error is very high, and I see software continue to progress and reduce the reliance on human data entry as a error vector. It will exist. There's always going to be inputs of some kind, and humans are always going to introduce error. But recognizing that software plays a key role in automating that is pretty important. This other stat, though, 2% of organizations have their business processes modeled. And that one actually speaks to me, because in my world, the concept of adequately mapping a business for the purposes of software automation is almost non-existent. Most companies have a hard time defining beyond the first 2 or 3 steps before the array of variables is too big to account for. So mapping for business modeling, for software mapping, becomes an insurmountable challenge. So it's important to recognize which types of software are suitable and for what reasons. There's an analysis, a degree of analysis that is required in order to approach software and technology in a way that's going to be useful for your business. And I don't have the absolute end-all, be-all, best way to do that, but I do have a suggestion here. But it's important for you, as a part of your business, to think about whether you've actually thought about where software automation is going to be most effective for you and why. Have you evaluated the risk? Have you had experts look at what you're doing? Have you looked at ways to minimize the risks that you can minimize and otherwise account for the risks that you cannot minimize with software? And for me, when I think about software, I look at it in three very, very broad categories. And I'm way oversimplifying this just for the sake of conversation today. But understanding the risk levels presented by automation and software in the trade compliance environment. The level one risk that I see, higher degrees of automation are relatively low risk. It will expedite things like administrative tasks that will have minimal impact on a compliance outcome. So if something goes wrong in the process, the errors are typically going to be minor discrepancies that are easily rectifiable or have negligible regulatory consequences. And we'll take a look at some examples here in a moment. But the level one risks for me are the ones that are not going to result in regulatory consequences. Level two risks are going to allow you to bring in some degree of automation, but are going to require you to exercise care either with the reliance on that automation or the degree to which a piece of it is going to be automated or driven by software. Generally, these are going to be for moderately complex compliance tasks, using a lot of times rules that are unlikely to change. Errors or oversights in these areas could lead to discrepancies or delays in shipments or goods stuck at borders. It may require corrective action, but generally without severe regulatory repercussion. You're unlikely to be penalized because you can remedy the issue and only suffer delays in the transit and maybe some conflict with your customers or your suppliers. And deciding what level of risk you're willing to accept is an essential component of this. So knowing what risks are on the table for your organization is kind of the whole point from a trade compliance perspective. And level three risk, automation is often going to be discouraged. And in fact, it may be prohibited by some regulations. There may be laws on the books today that require certain levels of due diligence or provability or methodology in order to be compliant with the rule. And failure to meet those is going to constitute, in some cases, negligence, or in the case of systemic errors, gross negligence, which is often the case. It rarely leads to fraud, but there are three levels of violation on the import regulations: negligence, gross negligence, and fraud. And systemic errors, where you are relying on a machine and the machine is reproducing erroneous results over and over again, and you fail to recognize or catch those errors, can result in gross negligence violations. Generally, these are going to be the critical or high stakes compliance tasks where errors can carry regulatory implications, including penalties. So fines, legal issues, reputational damage are all on the table. Generally, you're going to want immediate attention and comprehensive manual oversight on all of these areas, and recognizing how much software you want to introduce and rely on in the process is going to be crucial. So looking at some of the level one tasks, again, these are a higher degree of automation, relatively low risk, shouldn't be a huge a conflict. Some of the common tasks that we talk about here are going to be things like routine document preparation, having software pull information out of your ERP or your GTM softwares or your custom built tools and drop it onto documents is a huge time saver. It's been in place for 3 decades probably, that sort of implementation. And we take it for granted these days, but that's something you can usually rely on as long as it's pulling from the right fields and it's all mapped correctly. Tracking shipment statuses. We've seen evolution in the shipping industry to introduce GPS and RFID trackers into containers or onto certain high-value cargo to account for where the cargo is in transit. We've seen advancements in CTPAT expectations and supply chain security expectations where the governments are expecting you to know what happens to your cargo when it's at rest, how long it was there, who had control of it, all kinds of factors about it. And automated tracking allows us to get more visibility into those sorts of things than we had before. So this is an example of where software is introducing a degree of insight that we would not gain through normal documentation channels or communication channels. Product traceability, particularly things like inventory controls, here we're talking about things like knowing where in the warehouse goods are, especially if you're using things like first in, first out, or last in, first out for drawback or other import compliance programs, reconciliation, things like that. Being able to trace your product while it's in your control and knowing where it is in your internal supply chain. Data entry and validation, again, human error is going to continue to exist forever. And being able to validate the inputs and ensure that they conform to certain standards and help streamline that process to prevent risk from happening or prevent errors from happening is part of some of the good uses for software. And standardized reporting. This is one that is increasingly more important for businesses, not only businesses, but governments. Governments are using a lot more standardized reporting to analyze shipments for potential systemic issues, and they're beginning to target more and more companies that have systemic changes or systemic issues with their classifications, with their valuation, with their trade agreement claims. And they're able to trace and link supply chains in new and innovative ways where they can, using MIDs, manufacturer identification numbers that are recorded on every single customs entry, be able to identify where goods are being produced for purposes of forced labor, for purposes of other import compliance requirements. And the government is able to use big data analysis to generate reports and find problem areas. So effectively here, introducing automation into these tasks and many, many more, this is not a comprehensive list, in these ways is a good way to leverage tech to improve your job, your life, your overall compliance. When we get into some of the moderate risk areas, where some automation may be useful, but we need to exercise care, we need to be careful about how the software and to what degree the software is presenting a solution for us and how much we're going to rely on the software and how much we're going to have to train the people that are using the software. Restricted party screening is one of those areas where I know a lot of companies automate their RPS, their denied party screening processes by feeding hosts of information into a couple of lists that are provided by various government agencies around the world and look for any hits. But there are significant limitations with only doing that. Particularly, the system is only going to screen the parties that have been keyed in to the software. And as most of us know, there are more than just the order party and the seller that are part of the transaction. There are going to be intermediaries like freight forwarders. There's going to be warehouses along the way. There's going to be maybe a different delivery party than the buyer, and making sure that all those parties are captured in your restricted party screening process is a difficult task. So relying on software to do a portion of your RPS makes a lot of sense. Relying on or expecting your software to catch restricted parties when they're never keyed into the system is unreasonable. And I've seen people rely on that before, and that's what I want to make sure that people are paying attention to. Risk assessment and profiling, another area where you can rely on software and tooling and technology to capture certain information about your supply chain to help you identify and prevent risks. Things like shortages and overages occurring from a particular supplier or at a particular location. Things like transiting or using a particular carrier is resulting in certain delays. Using that sort of software analysis and interpretation to catch those sorts of trends is a very useful tool, but you can't use it as a substitute for knowing if there are bad actors in your supply chain or people that are like internal conspiracies and things like that. There's a lot of gaps in risk assessment and profiling. Origin and FTA determinations, value and customs valuation, and entry well, I'll talk about origin, FTA, value, and customs valuation. These are key factors on imports that the government expects you to have correct and require either a trained expert or an individual who is representing the business who is trained in these matters to make these determinations. There's terms called transacting customs business and conducting internal compliance activity defined in 19 CFR 111.1 that discuss what is and is not allowed by which parties. And transacting customs business must either be done by a representative of the organization or by a licensed customs broker. And knowing where those lines are for origin and FTA, for value and customs valuation, for HS classification, which we'll get to in a moment, all of those are considered transacting customs business, and you have to be diligent about what level of control your software has over these sorts of factors. So allowing software to store these things, not a problem. But having your software determine if your goods are eligible for an FTA or if the country of origin is transferred under the rules of origin, either of 102 or one of the other sections, is usually crossing a line. Software is not generally permitted to make those decisions under the regulations. Entry document processing, again, some degree of automation where it's pulling in information from other sources and plugging it into an entry is usually viable. Having software do OCR reading of an invoice and turn that into an entry and then not reviewing it for accuracy and just pressing go for the brokers out there. OCR software is a risk vector because, as we all know, documentation presented at the time of entry needs to be verified and validated, and we're responsible for more than just keying in the information. So I can't stress enough the importance of auditing the automated processes and the decision-making algorithms and the methods for use for any of these areas. If we're using software, making sure that we're aware to what degree the software is performing and what degree it is not performing. It's important to run those evaluations so that you know where things stand. You also want to look for the kinds of behaviors. A quick example here. Depending on, I've seen scenarios where in a business, product development is trying to create a new product in the ERP system. And in order to progress to the next step, they must have an HTSUS populated on the product, the new product they're making. And so product development is presented with a series of options that they have to select. And it will, as they make choices, it will feed them new options. And eventually, depending on what they choose, there will be an HTSUS populated by the system on that new product that they developed. And they can't move on until they've assigned that HTSUS through making their choices. What that results in, usually pretty quickly, not even taking months of time for people to adapt to it, usually within weeks, product teams learn that by clicking a series of buttons, they can continue doing their job, which is setting up the product in the system. Their job is not to have the correct HTSUS assigned. They don't know what HTSUS is. They don't know what harmonized system is. They don't know what classifications are. So they know that they can continue and finalize setting up the products if they follow a series of steps, regardless of the accuracy of it. And what that does is introduce systemic errors into your process that are very, very difficult to catch and know which ones are the product development team doing the right things and which ones are them just clicking buttons. So it's very, very risky when using software to achieve a certain outcome that we're not establishing kinds of behavior that reinforce environments where a normal person is going to approach it as, my job is to make sure that this product gets made. So I'm going to click these buttons to make sure it gets made. I'm going to fill in the boxes. I'm going to check the box, and I'm not going to worry about the accuracy because I'm not trained in those areas. So making sure that we're not reinforcing the bad behaviors. And then lastly, the level 3 risk, where automation is largely discouraged and in fact may be prohibited by law, depending on the circumstances. Classification of goods, I hit a couple of examples there. Some degree of automation could exist in some ways for classification, but I've yet to see it done in a way that is strategically viable in the long term. Most often, what it gets reduced to is asking a series of routine questions that are being answered by a trained professional in trade compliance, in classification. So being very, very careful about how you use software for classification of goods under the harmonized system, as well as designation of ECCNs. The amount of nuance required to interpret the ECCN rules, even the harmonized system, or recognize when an export license is required and how it's managed and when it's deprecated and when it's fulfilled, um, whether the parties on the transaction are the right parties. All of those things require a level of diligence that software doesn't inherently know how to do. You can train software to do certain things, but it's not going to catch all of the scenarios that come up in the real world, at least not in the way that I've seen it so far. It's more or less human nature to set it and forget it. And as soon as software starts making some of the decisions for us, we tend to rely on those tools to do those things for us. So I want to caution people when working with these areas, particularly audit or legal compliance assessments, where software is trying to find the red flags, but software only knows what it's been told to look for, and we stop looking. Once we get that report, once we get that analysis, we don't look for other things. It's part of our nature as people. So being aware of those things, and then lastly, sanctions and embargo programs that are in place, they fluctuate frequently, and the degree to which sanctions and embargoes apply is very, very nuanced. It's not tied to a specific product necessarily. It's not tied to a specific person only. It can be tied to a lot of different factors, and managing that sort of program can be very, very challenging. So we also, especially when looking at these level 3 risk areas, we want to make sure that there is transparency in how software is being used. We do not want to obfuscate the methods by which these decisions are being made. Part of our due diligence requirements and part of meeting the standards that are set out in BIS guidelines and customs guidelines is to ensure that we can produce the documentation upon request, which includes the documentation used to arrive at certain decisions. Whether we greenlit a particular customer or authorize the sale of a particular product, we need to be able to justify why we made that choice. And that goes towards whether or not we're going to be penalized or to what degree we will be penalized. So knowing how those pieces work is part of the program. So the key takeaway here is some tasks in trade compliance are fit for automation and are fantastic, but others need a human touch. So we want to talk about some of the strategies we need to blend that tech and that human insight for optimal compliance. Remembering, we're not on an island alone trying to figure this stuff out. We're trying to work together, at least on these webinars and on these sessions as a trade compliance community, to solve for the bigger problems. And recognizing that innovation is the outcome of a habit, not a random act, is, I think, one of the key things that has stuck with me over the years. Habit reinforces success. 62% of businesses have identified 3 or more major inefficiencies in their business processes. That is not a surprising statistic to me. I would go so far as to say there's probably closer to 99%, but maybe that's just the way my brain works. And some of our top challenges include the ease of use of technology, choosing the best tools for our business, the costs that are incurred by adopting technologies, and the leadership buy-in required to move forward with implementing technology or adjusting the way technology works in our environments. So I'm going to do a poll question here, asking, let's make sure I hit the launch button. Okay, there you go. We just saw that 62% of businesses say that they have not mapped their processes or that they have trouble with that automation. I'm curious whether you have mapped trade compliance processes in your organization. And this is very kind of a gut feel. Mapped in this context would mean that you have documented and auditable processes that identify the key steps within the process, identify your task owners, detail timeline expectations. Where do you feel like your organization fits? I'm going to publish the results of this poll here, so you can kind of get a sense of where you stack up in the trade compliance universe. And I will also give you my impressions of where things fell on this and where I thought they would, because I don't know the answer. And also when researching, I'm going to keep talking while people respond to the poll. When researching these topics, I realized that there's not a lot of good analysis on the trade compliance universe, and I'm having to figure out these things a lot for the first time myself. So this is all part of me building a better understanding of who the audience is and what you guys are doing. Okay, I am going to wrap up the poll. And I think I can share these results. Okay, there we go. That should work. Okay, a fairly even split. We have about a third, a little bit over a third, that say that they have more than 50% of their trade compliance processes mapped, and that's fantastic. That's actually a little bit higher than I was expecting. I figured most people would be in the 50% or under category. But as we can see, 2/3 of the audience have 50% or less mapped. And what that speaks to is, in my opinion, with 2/3 of the people not having those processes more than halfway mapped, it speaks to the fact that trade compliance is one of the last areas to get solved in many organizations. I'm not sure why that is, but maybe it's because of the degree of moving pieces that are involved. Maybe it's because the amount of volatility that there's been over the last decade. Um, so this is evident that a lot of people have a lot of work to do when it comes to even trying to introduce technology, because having a mapped process is essential to having a successful software implementation, particularly when you're concerning things like artificial intelligence or automation, full-on automation. So typically software relies on like crystal clear steps and ranges of permitted inputs and outputs. And most of us don't have that stuff figured out. Those of you that have them more than half mapped, that's fantastic. And yes, so I'm curious to see how this will evolve over the next couple of years too. I'm going to keep track of these stats for next time. Thank you. Okay, so strategy, one of the key strategies in any software implementation is recognizing expertise and how expertise is built. Software is a tool, not the knowledge source. Even AI that uses machine learning and can comb through the entire internet is not a knowledge source. It's a knowledge compiler, perhaps, but it is not a knowledge source. And recognizing the distinction there is pretty important. Wisdom versus knowledge for any D&D nerds out there. So experience, research, training, those things add up to trade compliance, expertise, and success. And smart software, in all cases, relies on smart users, smarter users, I should emphasize. Software can easily generate documents, but discernment is the human superpower right now. Recognizing when something doesn't look right, even though everything is filled in where it's supposed to, is one of the things that I'm impressed by every day in my industry, being able to look at two documents that are functionally identical with just different variables plugged in, but knowing that the one on the right isn't correct. So you want to be able to, you don't want to trade things like easy for accurate. You want to make sure that your expertise is putting you on the right side of the correct side, and choosing and making decisions that are rooted in that expertise, that knowledge area. When I master the skills, let software amplify your expertise. Crafting your audit strategy and amplifying your compliance game requires you to really prioritize your concerns, recognizing the priority trade issues that Customs advertises. Annually, they update these priority trade issues, recognizing your company policies and your weakness zones. Being able to map your processes is really a great way to identify your weaknesses, because you're gonna see where you have things that aren't measuring up to what the key compliance concerns are, or when you're not meeting your company policy. So mapping is a business process mapping is a huge deal. Questioning. This is one of the things that software and even AI I've been disappointed in, doesn't ask questions. And in this industry, a person that doesn't ask questions, my degree of confidence in their ability to perform without asking questions is very, very low. I know that I need to ask a lot of questions. And again, 20 years of experience in the field, I ask more questions than almost anybody I know. It's just part of the job. So that's one of the things that we have to kind of be aware of, that software does a very poor job of, is asking questions and using those answers effectively, which speaks towards defeating our blind spots. But first of all, recognizing our blind spots, that is something that we can do as people. It is something that's very difficult for us as people, but it is almost impossible for software. We want to focus where it matters most. Prioritizing, pick your battles, is a phrase that we've all used. My favorite saying is, I choose all of them, and people that work with me will know what that means. Um, but yeah, you want to be able to prioritize and choose your battleground and fight the fights that need to be fought and give in on certain things. And this goes toward that leadership buy-in question as well of how do we get leadership bought in? Part of it is in picking the right battles and knowing which ones are worth sticking to your guns for and which ones you can give ground on. And you want to inspect and elevate, particularly your service partners. I see too many people taking their service partners for granted. Brokers, brokers in particular, porters as well, but in my field, brokers come up a lot more often. They don't know your business. They would like to know your business. They're working to know your business, but they only know what they're told. And they can ask questions, and they often do, but how well they are able to understand those answers in the context of what they're doing for you it's not as easy as it sounds. I would also encourage everybody on the call that uses a broker or a forwarder to start up conversations with them in a way that helps them understand what the ultimate objective is. Not necessarily just how to read the piece of paper that's in front of them, but understanding what it is you need from them, either on timeline expectations or on just helping you make sure the documentation is the way it's supposed to be so that they can do their job effectively. So communication is really important, and paying attention is really important there. Success comes from blending technology with people and making sure that we train, check, and take responsibility. Yeah, I'll leave that as it is. Next up, we're going to talk about artificial intelligence and trade compliance. We're a little bit shorter on time than I expected. So I will launch another poll here. And this is just a fun little exercise where I'd like you to try and guess which software gave me which classification when I asked for the classification for a steel piece for a water heater. I plugged it into each of these softwares. These are all free to use, relatively open source, not open source, just free to use software that you can access. I use three different tools. I used the Schedule B search engine on census.gov. I used ChatGPT 3.5, and I used HTS US search on the usitc.gov website. And again, which software do you think gave me which classification? And hopefully these answers will make sense. I'll give you guys another few seconds here to kind of respond to this. And I had fun doing this exercise. And I would encourage all of you to try something like this as well. But when we talk about, a lot of people talk about using AI for classification. And in my experience, AI doesn't live up to the responsibility that classification has. And under the regulations, AI is not equipped to provide you with a classification. In fact, while we're still responding to this and people are still working on that, when I was using ChatGPT to give me this prompt, or provide me with this HS classification, the first thing it said is consult an expert. And I had to ask it again, hey, yeah, but if you had to guess, what would you say the classification for the steel piece for a water heater is? I said, well, if I had to guess, I would put it in this chapter. I'm like, okay, that's great. I have a chapter. That's first two digits. What's the full 10? It's like, I can't tell you the full 10. You should consult an expert for that. I said, okay, give me 4. And it did. It gave me 4 digits. I said, okay, well, what about 6 digits? And then it did. It gave me 6 digits. And I said, you know what? Give me the full 10. And it did. So I was able to use ChatGPT to successfully give me an HS classification on a prompt of just steel piece for a water heater. Okay, I'm going to end the poll here. And the correct answers are Schedule B gave me option 1. I kept this really simple for myself. So those of you, which looks like, oh, come on, 31% were correct. Oh, the prompts weren't quite right. Dang it. Chapter 73. Oh, it's all right. Option 1, 7206.90 was given to me by HTS or by the Schedule B search engine from census.gov. It did ask me if I wanted an alloy or a non-alloy part, and I answered that prompt, and then it gave me 7206.90. ChatGPT gave me chapter 73 first, and then I kept pushing it, and it gave me 73, 21, 90, 9,000 as the classification. And then the HTS US search engine on USITC Gov, literally, it's just a literal search. So it found the first match of the word that existed in my prompt. And when I searched for steel piece, the first word it found was piece. And it gave me 0207.11.0020, which is for pieces of chicken. So that's where that got me. For those of you curious, the actual answer I wanted it to give me was 85, 16, 90, 9500 for electric, instantaneous, or storage water heaters and immersion heaters, parts other. So I wanted chapter 85. None of these got there. It focused on the way that the question was asked led to 72, 73, or in USITC's case, chapter 2. So the point here is multifold here. You can get an answer from these softwares, and you can get different answers from these softwares using the same or virtually the same prompt. And all three of them can be wrong. So our reliance on classification, at least for the technologies that I used here today, are insufficient. You can probably engineer slightly more reliable results by limiting the range of options that it's allowed to choose for you. But it's usually going to provide you a very limited analysis. So artificial intelligence. Forget AI. In the brave new world of big data, it's artificial idiocy we should be looking out for. I enjoyed that quote. And we're getting close to the end here, so I'm going to move right along. AI has an interpretation barrier. It can process inputs, but it lacks the nuanced interpretation that is crucial in compliance matters. The semantics, the terminology, the application, and the litigation that has already existed on certain compliance matters, the preponderance of cross rulings that are out there. These are all things that AI struggles to process and utilize. And it's one of the things that we as humans can do relatively easily by making sure that we are understanding and interpreting the data correctly. AI output lacks validity as a standalone compliance justification. Presenting, if you were to seek a customs ruling, or if you were filing a prior disclosure, or any other customs or other agency official document, your use of AI is not going to be seen as a valid justification. We do have a case recently where, I say recently, it's been more than a year, a lawyer used ChatGPT to prepare a brief, and he submitted that to the court. And that brief contained a citation to a non-existent case. And that lawyer was sanctioned. I don't know if he lost his license or not, but it made news. The same sort of result would happen if we used AI to arrive at our classifications or our ECCN determinations or our restricted party analysis. It is not sufficient by itself. Human oversight is essential, and the contextual constraints of AI can be quite glaring, as we saw in that previous example. It is often unable to interpret what the inputs actually intend to say or intend to result in, and it will give you bad results based on that. AI can excel at automating routine tasks and boosting efficiency. So it has that advantage going for it, but there are other tools besides AI that are often, at least currently, still more effective for a lot of those routine pieces. Where AI I see excelling or moving ahead of other areas is in data analysis. This is an interesting area that I'm paying close attention to, but you can feed information and data to AI, a trained algorithm, to process large amounts of data and give you some insights and trends. And this is good at, I'd say, mostly at the corporate level or at the managerial level, where you're trying to make strategic decisions or prioritize resources based on larger trends. It's not going to catch minutia and areas like that, but it can give you some insights onto large amounts of data. However, using public AI software for that purpose is often going to be prohibited by company policy and privacy concerns. So you can't just do it automatically. AI is very, very expensive right now to introduce it. But using it to analyze things like your ACE reports could be a useful way to identify gaps in your supply chain or possible opportunities for changing your supplier, your supply chain routing, things like that. So I'm looking forward to data analysis from AI. Supplementing human expertise, it can support but not replace, and AI has a rapid processing advantage, especially when we're talking about large amounts of data. Right now, for me personally, I have to look at large amounts of data, and it takes me time. So AI can provide some advantages there, and those are some of the areas that I am interested in its potential over time. But ultimately, AI in trade compliance acts as an ally, but the true value lies in harmonizing with human expertise, ensuring a balanced approach. If we are not intelligently using AI or other softwares, really any software, with our expertise, then we're not getting the right result. And again, like I said at the top, when it comes to expertise in these areas, we are often out there alone on an island, or at least it feels that way, without anybody to work with. And that's one of the ways where building a community, having these conversations, these webinars, these sessions to surface ideas and give us a vector for at least having some communication about these topics will give us more of an advantage than we had yesterday. So I think it's important to make sure that we're working with our colleagues and our people in the industry to understand if what we're thinking is in line with reality and if what we're doing is conforming to current standards, and just having a sounding board. Okay, we're nearing the end here. So key takeaways that I'd like you all to have. Again, finding that balance, merging your human insights with your technology to elevate your standards and efficiency, but acknowledging the indispensable role of the human judgment in trade compliance matters. Again, we're talking trade compliance, and it is a nuanced field that changes frequently, more frequently in the last few years than it had in the previous decade. And it will continue to do so. We expect to see continuing evolution. The forced labor changes over the last year and a half, 2 years, are continuing to gain traction around the world, and we're seeing more and more impact and fallout from that. There's deforestation concerns and other concepts there that are adjusting the way supply chains work. There's the trade war that's been on for a long time. There are conflicts in parts of the world that are changing the way that goods move. So paying attention to those sorts of things, relying on human judgment and recognition and anticipation. I don't think I stressed it enough in this session, but anticipation is one of the things that humans are very, very good at. We can see the writing on the wall and adapt to it. Empower compliance through comprehensive strategies, integrating audits and using audit as a way to ensure that your tools are performing the way that they're expected to do. Again, as humans, we tend to take for granted what the technology does for us automatically, and we don't like to look. We like to set it and forget it. It's one of the things that we need to be very cautious about. And but beyond software, human focus, elevating compliance by prioritizing human skill development. There is no substitute for attending webinars like these and the ones that exist out there in the industry, participating in trade compliance groups and sharing your knowledge and being a member of the community is so far an advantage that is irreplaceable. And to that end, I want to say to everyone out there, one of the things that we're doing as part of this webinar is we're going to record the webinar. We'll post it on our website once the recording's been processed, and everybody that registered for the webinar will get an email with a link to where it exists on our website and YouTube and all that stuff. But on that page on our website will be a worksheet that you can use to begin outlining your business processes that you think are ready for automation or that you're trying to prioritize. It's not an end all be all tool. Really, it's a conversation starter. And what we're hoping for is that you'll complete that worksheet according to what your business is, and then send it to us to have a conversation with you about where we think you can make some tweaks or some of the red flags that you might have missed, or just giving you reassurance that you're on the right track. When you get the email following the webinar for this session, that link will contain a link, and it will contain the worksheet on that webpage. And you can complete that and send that to us at hello@starusa.org, and we will take a look at that. Okay, and that concludes our presentation today. For those of you that need the NCBFAA credit, and that's the only reason you're here, there it is on screen. Thank you very much for your time.